Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Libby Casey. I'm the on-air politics and accountability reporter here at the Washington Post. And I'm joined today by Stephen Hayes, editor-in-chief of the Weekly Standard and a Fox News contributor. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Indira Lakshmanan, the Newmark Chair in Journalism Ethics at the Poynter Institute and a columnist for the Boston Globe. Thank you, Indira. And April Ryan. Okay, a lot of April Ryan fans. Fantastic. White House correspondent, Washington bureau chief for the American Urban Radio Networks, and she's also a CNN political analyst.
Yes.
I'd like to remind you here in our audience and those watching online that you can send us questions on Twitter. Just use the hashtag #PostLive. And we really want to look at and talk about in this segment how we build trust and solutions. I don't even know if we should use the word rebuild trust. We can talk about how we got here, but I really want to hear from the three of you how we go forward. So Indira, let me start with you, because obviously Poynter has been digging into this question as well. Where do you begin?
Well, I think we do need to set the table a little bit about talking how we got here in the first place. And it is true, as the other panels have been discussing, that trust in the news media has been falling. Gallup has been looking at this since the early 70s. It began falling around 1977 and has been falling pretty much since then. What I thought was really interesting was that this year we're actually up from where we were at the all-time low in September 2016, right before the election. So trust in journalism is going up. There was a very interesting Edelman Trust Barometer annual survey that came out yesterday that broke it down with one graph that looked at trust in media versus trust in journalism. And I have never seen, in all the studies that have been done, I haven't seen it broken out in that way, and I thought that was really interesting. We did our own, I mean, this night Gallup poll is a fantastic, really deep and thorough survey, and I encourage all of you, now that they've given you copies, to go home and read it. It's really interesting and delves deep. We, a month ago, did a Poynter Media Trust survey where we specifically looked at polarization and political views and what people thought about the media. What I thought was interesting about the Edelman survey is that it showed that if you look at platforms, people's trust in social media platforms like Facebook is absolutely plummeting, whereas their trust in news journalism, as distinguished from that, is actually on the rise. And I thought that was some little bit of encouraging news. We all need encouraging news. And, you know, we can have a long conversation about how we start rebuilding it, but the important thing is, I think one of the things that has fed it is the rise of partisan media, particularly through cable, the sort of explosion of cable since the end of the fairness doctrine under the Reagan administration, and the sort of proliferation in cable news and talk radio, which have allowed sort of partisan viewpoints. So whoever on an earlier panel said if you're listening to NPR or if you're listening to Fox, you're in two different universes, that's right. I mean, you can completely go down one rabbit hole, whether it's digital, whether it's cable, whether it's radio, and listen to Rush Limbaugh or listen to Democracy Now!, and you're going to have a completely different view of the world. That, I think, is problematic, and I wish that instead of increasing the filter bubbles by social media sort of encouraging us to look at more of the same things, I wish that instead we were encouraged to get out of that filter bubble and listen more. And I love the idea that Margaret Sullivan was saying on the first panel about the most important use of social media for journalists is not for us to broadcast out all our ideas, but rather to listen to the public and hear what you all think. So that, I think, is something we should all be keeping in mind. Listening is my main objective for this year. I'm planning on doing some trust town halls throughout the country, bringing journalists like these two beside me, who I'm going to recruit for this, taking them, you know, all throughout the heartland of America and listening to people, hearing what they have to say and what is it that they want fixed. So that's where I want to begin the conversation. We can get back to it. I think there are certain things that we already know we can do, but I think it begins with listening.
Yeah, even Bret Baier was also speaking about listening and how it's such an important job of the journalist. And as I've been talking to journalists in the Washington Post newsroom, as they go out and report, people are surprised that journalists feel like one of their jobs is truly to listen. Not so much talking, not so much punditry. April, how do you show viewers, though? How do you show your audience and show your radio listeners that you are listening?
You hit the nail squarely on the head. I have a Twitter app the Twitter Q&A, and I like to throw out questions maybe once a week to get an unofficial unscientific poll for myself to see what people are saying. Sometimes I have those who are on the left, and sometimes I have those who are on the right. But I like hearing from everyone because I want to get the sense of what's happening out there, because we are in this crazy bubble. And of course you're going to hear the spin, but I want to listen to what America has to say, be it Trump land, be it Hillary land, be it your land, whatever land it is. And I think it's very important that listening is one of the primary pieces. And we also understand that it's not just two sides of the story anymore. It's all sides of the story. And I find myself really now being more so aggressive about getting the truth and putting the truth out versus opinion. I'm clear when I'm on the air, well, so-and-so says this, to give it attribution. Because the problem is the line has been obscured between fact and opinion now. And people do not know what to think. And they're like, well, wait a minute. And understanding the times that we're in. And, there is, this piece in social media that's not real. And some of the headlines are sensationalized. And I mean, I'm caught sometimes, I was like, oh, wow. And I look at the byline and I say, oh, this isn't real. And so it's incumbent upon us as journalists to really make sure we are putting fact, and make sure when we give the opinion of someone that they know that it's opinion, because the stakes are too high right now. The stakes are very high to be playing these games like, well, being ambivalent about what you say. No, you have to give fact, because I'm telling you, just this weekend alone, I had to knock down a lot of stereotypes and a lot of feeling. I said, let's give fact, because people need the facts, because, again, the stakes are very high right now.
Stephen, you've talked about how you want to grow your audience at the Weekly Standard. You don't just want readers who already agree with a conservative perspective. How do you reach across aisles to build trust and gain a readership that might not agree with your starting point?
Well, we're perfectly happy to have more conservatives too. I mean, we just want to grow our audience. Look, I think we see our role in a pretty specific way. We think it's important, particularly in light of the kinds of things that we're discussing now, for people to be able to go somewhere, conservative, liberal, center of the road, what have you, and learn new things, be presented with information that might challenge some of their deeply held views. And we're doing that on a regular basis. We're reporting things, I think that my liberal friends wouldn't like. We had a reported editorial a couple weeks ago embracing President Trump's change of view on Pakistan policies. And it was time for this kind of a change. At the same time, we're challenging our conservative readers on a regular basis. And when Indira and I have talked about this before, the way I've described it is what we're trying to do is provide information, not affirmation. We don't want people to come to the Weekly Standard only because they want to nod their head along with us and agree with everything we're saying. We hope that they're challenged, because it's through being challenged from other views that you're going to learn more.
And one of the aspects that this Knight study looks at is, are people sharing on social media for that affirmation to solicit agreement, or are they also posting things online to challenge other people's views and try to win people over? Yeah,
and to pick up on the points that were made here, look, if we leave here and journalists, the media industry, media academics do what you two are suggesting they ought to do, which is much more listening, we will have made tremendous progress. One of my frustrations as a lifelong conservative or libertarian, depending on how you'd want to describe me, is that conservatives have been complaining about a lack of objectivity in the media for literally decades. I think the inclination from a lot of my colleagues in the mainstream media, and certainly people I went to school with at Columbia, where I did some graduate school work, was just to dismiss that and say, oh gosh, there go those whiny conservatives complaining again. I think there's a reason that conservatives have been frustrated with the mainstream media for all these years, and the best thing that journalists can do is listen to that and take that into account and stop. And if you're inclined to say, there are those whiny conservatives complaining about the media again, to stop and say, well, wait a second, why are they complaining about this? Is this just a political move? Are they just trying to discredit the mainstream media? And I think that would be healthy for everybody, because I do think that that's a problem. I think it's contributed to where we are right now, and it's one of the reasons that conservatives across the country are so willing to believe President Trump when he says, fake news. They're all fake news. And it's unhealthy.
I'd like Indira to respond, though, because there is a question of, there's certainly a big area between outright dismissal and saying that's ridiculous, that's absurd, and saying, oh, you're right. I mean, so, Indira, how do you respond as a newsroom or as a journalist to accusations like that, some of which may be valid and some of which may just be political in nature?
Right. I mean, Steve is absolutely right. I mean, he didn't quite say this, but I will say Donald Trump did not create this problem. Donald Trump has capitalized on the existing distrust of the media in order to say fake news and try to discredit the entire media ecosystem. I mean, the objective is clear. He's doing it in order to say, I'm the only one you can trust. He wants to say, you can only believe me, you can't believe any of these other people, so that it discredits any negative news that's reported about him because he's discrediting the givers of that news. That predated him. It's incredibly dangerous to do that, as you say, to dismiss the entire news media ecosystem and say, no, you're all fake news. And that really troubles me. It's dangerous not only for American democracy, it's dangerous for governments and systems around the entire world. And we've seen a lot of autocrats around the world taking a page from Donald Trump, using the term fake news. Duterte in the Philippines has done it. Maduro in Venezuela was doing it even before Donald Trump, giving out fake news awards. This is terrible and really corrosive to democracy and government. But I will say, in terms of us acknowledging that, yes, people have a problem with us, particularly people on the right. We have to. And the science shows this, the surveys show this. Our poll showed that something like 77% of Republicans don't trust the news media, whereas it's almost flipped for Democrats. That is a real problem. So how do we address that? Steve is already doing something at the Weekly Standard with joining the International Fact-Checking Network, which is housed at Poynter. They're doing their own fact checks when he has said, well, conservatives have a problem with fact checks. They feel it's like, what do you choose to fact check, right? So now he can say, okay, we're going to fact check the things we want to fact check. As long as you're smothering every story in facts, that is what's important. As long as you're saying, here are the facts, you can fact check this person or that person, it doesn't matter. Make sure that facts are everywhere in that. And we need to be transparent. We need to not just listen to readers and viewers and listeners. We need to make clear that we have heard them. And one way to do that is, people criticize this, but the New York Times the other day turned over its editorial pages to Trump voters and made it all letters to the editor from Trump voters. That's a way of saying, we're listening to you, we're hearing you, and here are your views, and showing them. That's one way to do it. The Washington Post has done some tremendous stuff with being really transparent about how you do your work, whether it's annotating stories, whether it's your series, How to Be a Journalist, where you interview people in the newsroom about how they got their stories. That kind of transparency, labeling what's opinion, what's news, and making it clear and obvious so that I don't get, angry readers saying, you were a biased news reporter. And I say, wait a second, I'm a columnist. Right. Bias is a feature, not a bug. It's supposed to be.
Right.
But that is the point, making it clear to people and showing back to them that you are listening and this is how we do our job.
April, you're really responding to the term fake news, of course.
Yeah, and Indira, you're right about a couple pieces. But I have 2 points. One, when you say fake news and it's targeted at people, it's putting a target on our heads. And I say this from the knowledge of being a target. I said this recently, and it's true, I've gotten death threats because people have taken it too far. And we're so tribal now, it's like, just because you ask questions of a president, and I have the utmost respect for the office and this president, and I want to interview this president. I want a one-on-one interview. But people are looking at it like I hate him or I'm trying to do something. I'm reporting to you things you may not like, but they're fact. And then when you try to suppress the press, it's not about suppressing us, it's about suppressing the information that you need. So people need to stop saying fake news, and understand it's deeper than that. It's about suppressing information and fact that you need to understand to be able to formulate your own opinion on who to vote for, on a situation in your community, what have you. So this is bigger than just this moment in time, but it's getting very dangerous.
April, I want to share one item that came out of this Gallup Night survey that just fascinated me. 4 in 10 Republican respondents said accurate news stories that show a politician or political group in a negative light are always fake news. So we're talking about not sort of truth and falsehood, but agreement. I'd love to hear what you do with that. April, Stephen, Stephen, let's start with you. What do you do with that information?
Look at Stephen pondering hard.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, it's a real problem. We get this at the Weekly Standard. I get it with some of the things that I say on Fox when I challenge the president or when I point out the things that he said that are not true, which happens, as the previous panel discussed, with far too great a frequency. And people don't want to hear it. You can show them a video. Literally, I've had occasions where I've shown people videos of President Trump saying something. It's a video. He said these things. And they will deny that it happened and say, it had to have been doctored, fake news, you got that from the mainstream media. I can't believe you're one of them now. I liked you better when you liked the Tea Party. And it's a huge problem. I think this is why the answer, to go back to your original question, in terms of a solution, is your phrasing on the solution is great. Smother people in facts again and again and again. Be relentless about smothering people in facts. That's not to say you can't make. We're an opinion magazine. We call ourselves a conservative journal of opinion. It's not to say that you can't also make arguments that have opinion, but when you're making a fact-based case, you have to put the facts first.
April, what do you do with that information? This definition of fake news that is so malleable, depending on who you talk to.
What do I do with it? What do I do with it? I think back about something my mother said. My late mother used to tell me that came from Dr. Martin Luther King. It's not what they call you, but what you answer to. I don't answer to that. I've been at the White House for 21 years this year. I've been in this business for 30 years. And I'm not fake. Again, when I give information, I always, and especially in that briefing room, I try to support it with so-and-so said this, so it is not as if I'm giving my opinion or I'm throwing darts. I'm not fake. I'm a news person. I'm a journalist. Journalism 101 has been out of the window. There's so many citizen journalists now who feel that they can come to the White House, who can just put up on a blog, and this is what I saw. But it's deeper than just the moment in the briefing room. There's other digging you have to do inside of that White House, outside of the White House. To hear the word fake, it's ugly. And it's for many of us who are in that room, who are seasoned journalists, and Steve, I'm sure you'll say the same thing, we're not fake. Yeah. The vast majority of us are not fake, and I do not embrace that at all.
Look, the president has, he deserves some of the blame here. The president has elevated...
You're going to get in trouble for that.
Fake news. It won't be the first time. The president has elevated some fake news outlets, given them seats in the White House briefing room.
Oh, yes. First question,
that's a problem.
Second question. Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. The other point, just to jump in.
By which you mean conspiracy theorists posing as news sites who are not doing actual reporting. They're just making stuff up, putting hoaxes out. People who
foils.
Like the
we should name them. Gateway Pundit is one of them. Gateway Pundit is one of them. Well, I did. I did. It'll be featured on their. It'll be featured on their blog, and it'll rile people up.
I'm the poster child for stuff like that, for organizations like that. So you said it. So
And InfoWars is another organization that puts out false information. We should stick with the original meaning. The original meaning of fake news, and on one of the panels that's coming up is Craig Silverman from BuzzFeed, who was one of the people who pioneered this term, but it was really meant to refer to conspiracy theories. And the fact that CNN did a count and found that in his first year in office, Donald Trump used the word fake more than 400 times. That means more than once a day, he was calling something he didn't like fake. Whether it was fake news or fake polls or, fake people. It's like anyone he doesn't like, it's fake. That is just so wrong. It's become so politicized. What he's done is he's appropriated the term and changed the meaning to mean something else. It's robbed of its original meaning.
Right, and this White House, and I'm not just going to say this White House, other White Houses are very aware of what reporters have the lean to whatever that administration is for, or if they agree with certain policy items or agenda items. They are very well aware of that room. They know who is in that room, who is for them regardless. They can say the sky is orange and they believe it, and they're right, the president said the sky is orange, and the sky is clearly blue. But it's a very interesting dynamic in that room. They feel it's interesting. when they know that they're going to get pushback on certain issues, there's certain reporters that they won't call on. When they feel like they could win something, they'll do more conservative journalists that day, or more people who I guess would say supported the president. I mean, just look at the Christmas party. I mean, a lot of it was and I wasn't invited, and I wasn't going to go anyway, but those who came to the Christmas party were a lot of those who espouse a lot of the policies and theories and ideologies of this president to the Republican Party. So it's sad. It's a sad day when it's us versus them, instead of all of us really just trying to get to the heart of the issue.
This is so disappointing, because the whole point of, in the past, you can say whether White House Christmas party or White House Correspondent Association dinner, whether those things are silly or not, that's another conversation. But the point of it has been a way to have casual time with sources who we work with every day. So I spent 8 years covering the State Department, and the State Department Christmas party. It doesn't mean you're schmoozing up Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. It means you're there to talk to your sources. It's a casual moment. And the
build on a relationship.
Right. And the problem is that once it becomes something where it's seen as political, to either attend or not attend something where you're source building, that's bad.
It is very bad.
The whole point of this is we're supposed to be reporting. I have to give credit to my friend Sudeep Reddy at Politico for that term, smothering a story in facts. But that is what we're supposed to be doing. That's our job, and bringing information. And the more that people question the underlying information, and corresponding with that, the more that we have people who are Trump supporters and Republicans saying that there should be limits on press freedom.
I want to get in one question.
We have 1/4 of people in our survey saying that there should be limits on the First Amendment. I mean, that's terrible. We're going down an incredibly dangerous path if there are 1/4 of Americans who think that.
What is the responsibility of news organizations versus journalists themselves to show some of this accountability and transparency to rebuild this trust? And I'd love to hear how you, as individuals, how do you build trust on a personal level? Not just as journalists, but as people. It's a question that we can all ask ourselves. How do I learn to trust Indira? I check you out, I look at you online, I get a sense of your perspective, I look for common ground, ways I can relate to you. So how do we build trust?
Everyone's looking at me. Okay.
We all just kept turning to your
I tell a lot of my sources, my Republican sources as well as my Democratic sources and independent sources, I believe in building bridges and not burning them. And over the years, for instance, I don't have to say anything. And I'm sure, Steve, you have the same situation. Sometimes stories just fall in your lap, because they know, they've watched you, and they know that you're accountable, that your journalistic integrity is there. Sometimes I don't have to ask anything. For instance, I'm going to give you two examples from different administrations. During the Obama years, how in the world, this journalist from American Urban Radio Networks, I had my own deep throat with the ACA numbers, and the White House like, where did you get those numbers from? I said, where did you get yours from? I was beating them every time. I knew when the president called in, I knew when Dennis McDonough was there, and they were like, how are you finding out? So if you really work with integrity, and you're accountable, and you work for fact, people will find that out. And then in this administration, I'm not going to say the name, I was on the air until 2 o'clock in the morning on Don Lemon's show we were doing the election coverage when Doug Jones won, December 12th. Well, apparently that night was not also election night, but it was a pretty hot night at the White House, because at 6 a.m., my text messages were blowing up. I didn't get any sleep. And after you get about 5 people from different areas telling you something happened, so-and-so was fired, there was high drama, you've got to pay attention. So if you are a journalist worth your salt, worth your pen and your pad, you have earned the right for people to call you with information. Sometimes you just sit there. You don't have to dig.
So that's developing trust with sources and showing that you are open to all sides. But how do we build trust with an audience? And Stephen, do you see it as more a personal agenda for you? Do you see it as something the Weekly Standard has to do as an organization? What's our roadmap?
Yeah, I think by sort of telling people what we aim to do, by talking about adhering to facts and putting facts first, we're giving people some context for our reporting and for the opinion journalism that we do. I have to say, one of the other ways is simply to avoid doing more harm. And this is a place where I think I'm very critical of the mainstream media. I think a lot of times what you're seeing is people who go into the White House briefing room and are using it as a show. And the questions are not healthy, skeptical questions. It's antagonism and hostility. And I think we see this all over the place. It's not about you. It's about the stories you're reporting. It's about conveying facts to your readers or your viewers. And to the extent that people position themselves as hostile to the White House, I think it does great damage. Now, that's not to say, I mean, there's a lot of talk about calling balls and strikes. We're calling balls and strikes. We think it's important also to talk about how this new political and media environment is also distorting the game itself. It's important to put that into context. So you can do more than calling balls and strikes, but you don't make yourself the story. Don't make yourself antagonistic to the president and the White House. I'll just say, since I named a name earlier, I'll name another name earlier. I was listening on the drive-in to Chris Cuomo interviewing OMB Director Mick Mulvaney this morning. And he started out with a couple fact-based questions about the shutdown. And the conversation very quickly veered off into Chris Cuomo's opinion about DACA and the Dreamers versus Mick Mulvaney's opinion about DACA and the Dreamers. Now, I happen to be more sympathetic probably where Chris Cuomo comes from than I am where the president is on this, or sometimes is on this. But
you're going to get in trouble.
Speaking of not taking shots. But it devolved into this sort of semi-shouting match of just opinion versus opinion. And you know what? You know, conservatives who are watching that are going to look at that interview and say, "This does not work for me. I'm not watching this guy yell at this administration guy."
The same thing is true. MSNBC, you see a lot of hosts who have a liberal point of view. On Fox, you see a lot of hosts who have a conservative point of view. So the same thing can be said about both. That when you have cable news hosts who are inserting their opinion, now that's the format of the show. I think you come to it as a viewer knowing that's what you signed up for. You turn on the TV. I mean, assuming you haven't landed from Mars, you know that you turn on a certain cable network and you're going to get opinion journalism laced in from the host.
I do want to point out that as I was interviewing Stephanie McCrumman, one of the reporters who broke the Roy Moore allegation story, she was going down and knocking on doors in Alabama, the state where she is from. She was going down there, knocking on people's doors, asking questions, and she said people were so surprised to see a reporter at their door with a notebook and a pen and ears, who just wanted to ask questions and get information, who wasn't coming to prejudge, because what they were picturing was punditry on television. They weren't picturing a reporter as doing that sort of shoe leather stuff. And it ties into something that one of our followers, Patrick, on Twitter says, doesn't spin drive better audience numbers? And if so, is that at odds with providing more trustworthy news and doing some of this very basic nuts and bolts of reporting?
I personally believe that we should be doing much more of the straight journalism. I have no problem with opinion journalism. I have no problem with opinion hosted shows, but I think just know that that's what it is. Be transparent about what it is. And that is, again, where I think websites need to be clear about the about thing. I mean, Stephen on the Weekly Standard, it's very clear. You come to the Weekly Standard site, you click it, you can read about us, and you know exactly what it is. Like I said, the Washington Post is a great example of clicking, you know, you hover with your mouse over any story and you can immediately see that's analysis, that is opinion, that is news. You can see what it is. So as long as you're transparent and clear and honest about what it is you're presenting, I mean, some of it is also on the audience to educate themselves. We need to help them help themselves in terms of news literacy. We need to make it easy to say, this is why you should trust us. We're transparent. Here are our tools, and be honest about whatever it is you're doing.
Can news literacy be brought into the public school system, Steve, in a way that is depoliticized? I mean, can we get news literacy into schools and get everybody on board with it?
It's a good question. I certainly hope so. You know, part of the challenge today is that what we do as journalists is so different than what we did 30, 40, 50 years ago. I mean, 40, 50 years ago, New York Times would go and cover a speech, let's say, of a presidential candidate. And it was literally the journalist's primary job to say, here's what happened. But I think today, given the fact that you all can watch the speech on television or on the internet live streaming or can read a quick take about it, so many journalists don't feel the need to take that first step and say, here's what happened. They jump forward and they give you maybe a paragraph or a brief synopsis. The president said this, or the candidate said this. Here are all the reasons that it happened, and here's the backstory, and here's what they're trying to do. And some of that can be important information, but I think it's the kind of gray area or grayer area that allows for more injection of personal views, and I think that's going to be a continuing challenge, even with if you talk about enhancing news literacy and through education.
Another viewer on Twitter asks, do we need to redefine who is media versus news? And points out that the words are used interchangeably, but should they be used interchangeably?
I don't think so. I mean, media is a much broader audience that obviously, I mean, a much broader thing. It involves entertainment. It involves platforms, as we discussed, Facebook, Twitter, that's all media. We are news. And maybe we need to sort of re-own this and take back the word news and the word journalism proudly and say, this is what we're doing, and it involves certain skills. It's not just like a hot take from someone's basement. Right. You know, it's not the same as anybody just putting out their opinion, where there are actually facts behind it, sourcing behind it. Anonymous sourcing is a whole other conversation that we could have, but what I find amazing is sometimes people just have no idea. I've had people say to me, how can you use anonymous sources if you don't know who they are? And I'm like, no, I know who they are. My editors know who they are. We're just not telling you who they are for certain reasons. But a lot of very smart people who are not in the news don't understand that, and we need to do a better job of explaining that.
Yeah.
April, we're out of time, but I just want to give you a moment to weigh in on this question of where we go from here. And you've had to put up with a lot in terms of personal criticism and sort of personal attacks. So give us some tips on how you rise above that and just keep doing your job every day.
I did nothing wrong. I have done nothing wrong. I go back because that is what I trained for, I attended college for, received a Bachelor of Science for. I think how we rise above it is when people really earnestly look at the stories, don't look at the personalities. Yeah, you may not like the question that I may ask, but look at the atmosphere. Listen to what's been said by the leaders and understand there's a reason for the question. It's not just coming out of thin air. And the problem is, in these last two presidential cycles, be it Barack Obama and be it Donald J. Trump, we had people who've never been in the process of finding out about news before. Now we have people who are political junkies. They call themselves political junkies. And they have to understand this is not entertainment. This is real life. This is not reality TV. And those briefings are not reality TV. This is real life. Everything comes to that White House between war and peace and everything in between. And when you have that, people need to understand this is how we rise above, that this is real. And these questions are real. It's not for show. I don't come in there and play to the cameras. I come in and do my job. And I believe Indira and Steve will agree that we have to really assess, and everyone has to take onus for this, that when we look at a piece, we have to put our feelings sometimes aside and look at the piece and then come back with our feelings. Because I think this is too wrapped up in feelings. And I think the way we rise above it is to look at it as life and not romanticize it, entertain it, look at it as real. This has been around for a long time, since colonial days, the snooze thing. And, you know, our founding fathers didn't know Twitter was coming and didn't know cable was coming. But I thank God that there is a First Amendment that wraps us and allows us, even if they want a war on us, to ask those questions that affect you. That's how we rise above.
April Ryan, thank you so much. Indira Lakshmanan and Stephen Hayes, thank you to all of you for being here. And thanks for watching.